I did a video. Okay, so today's topic is we're looking at recorded exams. So we're looking at, I've just to be a bit clever, I've gone the when, the how, and the why. So, and obviously recorded exams have been around for a while, but there's lots of questions that keep coming up on Facebook, so I thought I'd address that. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Sarah. I am an examiner, but I examine for Conbrio Examinations, which is an Australian recorded exam board. So, specifically in this talk, I'm looking at the ABRSM exams and their criteria, but it will transfer to other boards. So, I'm not speaking officially on behalf of the ABRSM. We're just looking at some of their documentation. So I'll try and share screen. Well, that says chat. Where's share screen? Share screen options. Oh, that's not what I want. Share. No, I don't want that. I just want to share. Share. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'll press play. Okay. So, the when. When do we use recorded exams? Because obviously there's the recorded exams, there's the face-to-face exam. So for the when, I just thought, well, let's look at what some of the benefits are for doing recorded exams. So one is that it's child-centered learning. So students only do the exam when they're ready. With a face-to-face exam, there's a set date, and so if the student's not ready by that date, then either they get a lower mark, or if they're ready before that date, they've got to wait and they can't progress. In Australia, we only have ABRSM examiners coming out once a year. So the benefit of a recorded exam is I can go, oh, my student's ready now, we record now. Whether that's before or after we'd planned is irrelevant. We get to go with their learning. And another benefit is that no child should ever experience failure in a recorded exam, because we can look at the video and go, is that good enough? Does that meet the criteria? And if it doesn't, then we can just record again another week and another day. So the real benefit is we don't really want our students to experience failure, because it can be such a negative thing. But they can reflect and work on things. So why recorded exam? What other benefits? Well, as I just mentioned, they can actually submit their best work. So not only do they not fail, but if they do a recording and it's not their best work, no problem. They can record it again next time. And so then the comments the examiner's giving is not, oh, it's a shame that you got nervous today and it mucked up all your pieces or whatever. But rather, the examiner's able to give comments that the student can actually use to improve and become better. So, but in face-to-face exams, obviously that does happen. The number of AMEB exams that I've had students do, I have myself done, where they say, unfortunately, you were obviously nervous and you were shaking. Whereas this doesn't happen in a recorded exam, because if they're shaking, that's right. We've got next time to do it. So the comments actually are going to be things that can help them learn and reflect on their own playing, rather than just things they knew that they did wrong because it was a performance. A benefit is that there's no scale, sight reading, and oral. They go, well, some teachers will go, but wait a second, why is that a benefit? Well, it's a benefit because when we do a face-to-face exam, the scales are set, the sight reading is set, and the oral is set. You have to do the scales that match the grade, the sight reading that matches that grade. But students and people, we don't learn everything at the same speed. So with a recorded exam, we can go, oh, well, this student's working through oral and maybe they're ahead of their grade, but their sight reading might be a little bit behind, and their scales might be, well, actually we want them to do these scales because these scales relate to their pieces. So we can tailor the learning a lot more when they're not being tested in the exam room. So we can, as I said, we can develop at the student place. However, just as an important note, I'm not saying don't teach scales, sight reading, and oral. They're still important, and they're always going to be important, and they're always necessary. The only difference is that each of them can go at their own speed, and so the student's learning can be sort of compartmentalized where it needs to be. Another benefit of the recorded exam is they're using their own instrument, and for young children particularly, that's a big thing. If they're going to a piano, that maybe the keys are a bit stiffer, the pedals are a bit stiffer, they don't have their own chair, so it's not height adjusted to their right height. They're in their own space. The weather's not going to be, oh, it's a snowy day, so we're all freezing cold. Everything can be how they want it. And again, it's a recorded exam, so if the weather's bad today, we can come in another day. So I do remember it wasn't for an exam, but I was playing for a ballet exam and it was snowing outside. And I got there at 8 a.m. and the hardest grade of music was first thing and my fingers were frozen. So there's obviously a benefit when we don't have to worry about the weather because we're recording and we're using our own instrument, so it's the one that we know. And another benefit is then there's no audience. So that can be a benefit. It can be a con, which I'm not sure if I cover what's the con of not having an audience in this one. But for some students, just not having the audience there actually gives them a sense of safety. And particularly for our neurodiverse students who sometimes don't want anyone to hear a not perfect version. So having the no audience can really make it an accessible exam for them. I'll just admit. How do I admit? Why won't it let me admit? Where's my... Oh, now that's annoying because I can't see my cursor. I'm just going to escape out of that for a second. And... oh dear. Now that's something I did not expect to happen at all. But where's Zoom? Admit. I'll know that for next time. Back to Keynote. But I don't know how to continue to share, and I've mucked things up a little bit now because I don't know what I'm doing because I can't see my mouse at all. Presentation. Can I open it? Oh dear. This has really not been very good. I wonder if I change computers. Oh, there's my mouse. Don't know what happened. Screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. Okay, so I'll share again. Sorry guys, I don't know what my computer's doing. What if I just share my whole desktop and see if that helps? Make it easier. Okay. Now, yep, so I've just talked about no audience. Okay, next one. Why? Another why of recorded exams, and I think this is something that's often missed. Recorded exams can be used to teach good metacognition. If you're not familiar with the term metacognition, that's thinking about learning. So it's sort of a buzzword, I guess, in schools these days that we want students not to just learn, but to think about their learning and think about how they learn. Because if they learn how to learn, then they can self-perpetuate their learning and they're not so dependent on the teachers. So in the case of a recorded exam, the best way to use it, I think, is to use the recording to self-reflect. I hear stories, and I know some of my parents do it, where we record, and actually sometimes I've fallen into that trap. We record, oh, let's just do another take. Let's just do another take. Let's do another take. And what happens is that the pieces start degrading. So that's not how to use, and I'm going to go into that a bit later. But what we can do is we can do the recording and then stop and watch it. Students can speak about what they've done and reflect on it verbally, or if they're at the right developmental stage, they can write things on their music. Oh, this is a bit that I did wrong. This is a bit that I could have done better. Once those sections are marked on their own music, and maybe they mark that, oh, maybe it would have been good to put a crescendo there. But once those sections are marked on, what's important is to work on those sections, improve those sections before you do another take. And you might go, oh, but I don't usually make that mistake. It doesn't matter if you usually make the mistake or not. Once they've made a mistake, pull those bits out, work on those bits, improve those bits, and then record again. So as I just said before, don't record over and over and over without self-reflection. Pieces degrade when we do that. So make sure we're working on things to improve. Okay, so here's our two methods of recording, and different teachers will argue for the benefits of each of them. So the first option is just practice until they've mastered everything, just like you do in a normal face-to-face exam, and then only record once. Now, one of the benefits of that is you can get trapped in a cycle of, I just want the perfect recording. There's no such thing as a perfect recording. So we could work on something for 6 months when really the time to move on was after 3 months. So having that, everything's mastered, record once and it's done and dusted. And that is actually one of the benefits of a face-to-face exam, that once you've walked out of the room, you're not left trapped in that cycle of searching for the perfect recording. But option 2 is the one I use most often. I actually start recording a bit early. I call them practice recordings before the student's actually ready to submit. Because then we can go back to our metacognition, then we can reflect on what we've recorded, and they can reflect, and obviously at the young ages, the teacher or the parent's helping the reflection process, because they need to learn how to think about learning, right? So they can self-reflect, they can take those bits out, they can work on them, and they can put them back in. So I do start recording before they're ready. Maybe that sometimes can be a bit frustrating for students who, and so maybe that sometimes the option one is better, because then, oh, well, that's done and we don't need to worry about it. But yeah, so they're the two options for how you can approach recording. Now, the practical aspects. So the child must be fully visible, including the pedals, including the face. I've examined students and their face is covered. And so then there's the next by their hair, right? Next question, is it actually them? And so I've had to highlight that. And thankfully, I've only had to do it once. And thankfully, it was a student that was known. So the board knew who they were and it wasn't an issue. But this is why it's so important. The child needs to be fully visible. The pedals need to be fully visible, because it's very hard to make a comment when maybe I can hear that the sound is way too blurry, but I don't know whether it's because they haven't adjusted to the room's echo or whether it's because they're using the pedal at the wrong time. So being able to see what's going on, particularly in a recorded exam where there is actually less data. When you're in a face-to-face exam, the examiner has the whole room as the data, right? When you're listening to a recording, it's digitally sampled, so there is a loss of data in a way. There's only one angle, so we want to make sure we include as much in that angle as we can. The instrument and the accompanist must be fully visible, because otherwise the examiner can't see if there's any communication between the instrument and the accompanist. Not the instrument, the player of the instrument, the soloist and the accompanist. So that we want to see, are they communicating with each other, and how? Sometimes, I wasn't going to talk about this, but sometimes there's a fake communication, which actually annoys me, where the student sort of turns and nods to the pianist, whereas that's a sort of it gets a bit tacky. Whereas in a professional context, I might look at the pianist, do my breathing so the pianist knows what speed that I'm going to be playing, and then we start. So there is, but that whatever that communication is, and the communication while playing, you want the examiner to be able to see that. The candidate's face must be seen, I just mentioned before. The video must not be edited in any way. And that's super important. The only thing that can be edited is a verbal introduction. And I actually recommend that, because it's particularly when we're dealing with young children, that having the verbal literacy skills at the beginning and then having to record the 4 pieces, that's quite a lot of cognitive effort. Whereas if they're just focused on the playing and then, oh, we're finished, we've got our perfect recording, now let's do our verbal introduction. So that sort of editing is allowed. No other sort of editing is allowed. No pitch modification, no splicing, no other editing at all. Now, the ID must be shown next to the candidate's face for ABRSM. It needs to be long enough for the examiner to verify the identity. And that's very important, that we want to be sure that we keep away from any appearance of not doing the right thing, that this is definitely the right candidate. You've had time to check it. You've had time to read the ID, so that everything is above board. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the ABRSM criteria. I've only picked out the distinction comments. I haven't gone through all the other comments. So as I said at the beginning, I'm not an ABRSM examiner. I'm just reading the criteria. And I see here it says notes and pitch. So that's pretty obvious. If you want to get a distinction, they need to be highly accurate. And the intonation needs to be accurate. So if it's students bending wildly out of tune, you can't expect to be in the distinction category there. But that's most people can understand that category, no problem. So now we've got the next category, which is called time. And so the syllabus says, the criteria says fluent with flexibility when appropriate. So fluency involves not pausing on bar lines, not pausing between phrases, and not hesitating to jump and find a chord or something like that. But the flexibility is our rubato. And I think of rubato is something like an elastic band. Do I have one on my sofa? No, it doesn't look like it. You can stretch an elastic band and it goes back together, but you don't want it to break. So the counting might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. But it doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. break. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it always has this feeling of continuity, even if it's getting faster or slower within that beat. So it's got to feel organic. Flexibility might be those slight speed changes that are used to influence phrasing, even in a piece where it's not a typical romantic rubato, but in classical music you might have some slight speed changes to show where your phrasing ends. And I just said flexibility feels like stretching the pulse, never feels like a break in the pulse. Now the next comment in the criteria is rhythmic character is well conveyed. Now, if the music is too slow, you're going to lose marks in this section because the character of a particular piece will not be conveyed if it's too slow. The same as if it's too fast. If you've got a waltz and you're playing it way too fast that nobody could dance it, then again, our rhythmic character is not well conveyed. So not too fast, not too slow. I'll put a caveat on that though. I would say to a student, I would rather you lose marks for being too slow, which means you lose marks here, than to lose marks for being sloppy. Because then you lose marks in so many sections. You lose marks for rhythm, you lose marks for notes, because you've gone faster than you can handle. So I would say that this is the one that I would sacrifice personally, or encourage a student to sacrifice rather than losing marks in other sections. But you would still expect to lose marks once you're not conveying the rhythmic character. So speed is important. Metronome marks on the music, if they're editorial, you don't need to worry. You need to look at the character word. Does the way I'm playing match whatever my character word is? If the composer put the metronome mark in, then we take it a little bit more religiously. Okay, the next category is tone. And it said well projected. And I often joke with students, P doesn't stand for piano, it stands for projected. You know, when you're watching a musical and the singer is trying to whisper, they still need to project that whisper so it goes to the back of the stage. There's a moment in the Les Mis anniversary edition, and I guess it's probably done in everyone, where the bartender's wife is there and she's whispering, and it's like yelling whispering. So we want our music to be well projected, whether that's in the tonal aspect. And then it says sensitive use of tonal qualities. So when I see that, I think, well, dynamics is sensitive use of tonal qualities. And I'll clarify that in a second. Or maybe I'll clarify it now, that the dynamics need to relate to what's happening in the music. So if it says forte and then piano, but we're in classical, you don't want that to be like this ginormous forte and this tiny little p, because then the dynamics aren't sensitively used. So we want to look at what's our dynamics in our music and how can we use them in a way that still sounds unified with the piece. So that would be where I think the word sensitive is. Now, tone qualities. Is it harsh or is it resonant? Now, as an examiner, for Conbrio, I noticed the students are performing these pieces and they're playing all the notes right, but it just sounds like a typewriter. It's like, yes, I've got my notes, but where's my tone? Is my tone harsh, or is it actually beautiful and resonant? And, you know, there's a brittleness to tone when the fingers are tense, and there's a resonance when there's a relaxed technique. And same if we're playing a stringed instrument, there's a resonance that we get when we have our bow exactly with a good contact to the string, parallel to the bridge, with the correct speed for the dynamic level we're playing. So there's that resonance in flute and woodwind instruments where we're playing our notes and listening to our tone. Is it harsh, or is it just really beautiful and matching the quality of the piece? So, as I just said, tension is one of the causes of harshness in tonal quality. And technique matters for tone quality. If our fingers are not, thinking about piano again, if our fingers are not working correctly and evenly, then our tone quality will be uneven. So technique is important. And here we go back to, if we're doing a recorded exam, we still want to be practicing scales. We still want to be practicing technique, even though they're not marked as a separate section. They're marked here under tonal qualities because we get the result of whatever our technique is. Okay, and then the next criteria is shape. Now the expression there was expressive, idiomatic, musical shaping, and detail. So I feel like this criteria seems to cross over with another one we'll do later. But when I read that expression, I'm seeing that the music must communicate a narrative in order to get distinction. If it's just the notes again, if it's just the notes, does the listener get some sort of story? Do they get some sort of, oh, this is what the music is doing. This is this phrase, and this is this phrase. Oh, and this is that idea that's come back again. So whoever's listening must be able to hear it. It's fine for it to be in our head, but we need to do it in a way that the audience can hear it. There needs to be shaping. There needs to be rise and fall in every phrase. We used to joke that they're like hairpins, that, you know, those bobby pins you put in the hair. They're crescendo and decrescendo. And most phrases, even though it's not marked, will have some sort of crescendo and decrescendo. And you want to find them, and then you want to do that to bring out the shape. And now that might not be the same. I might play it one way. Someone else might play it a different way, as long as it's expressive and it's idiomatic. Now, idiomatic means appropriate to the music. And that could mean appropriate historically. It could mean appropriate for how that music is played in society, even if maybe that's not historically correct. But the idiom of the music needs to match the shaping. And then the shaping needs to highlight climaxes. So you're looking through each phrase, you're looking, what's my climax in this phrase? What's my climax in the piece? And that's what the shaping needs to do. It needs to bring those moments out. Without bringing those moments out, we're not showing our shape. Now, another thing about shaping, and I could have put this under tone, but accentuation must be appropriate to the surrounding phrase. So often students see accent, they go, yay, accent. It's true, it's accented, but the accent needs to match. If we look at the jewelry I'm wearing quite a casual dress. It's some horrible temperature here at the moment. If I was to wear some big $10,000 diamond necklace, it would look really out of place for what I'm wearing. But if I wore a little chain, it would look appropriate. So we've got to think about the same with accentuation. It's like jewelry, and it needs to fit. Or it's like the countryside, and we're in the middle of the countryside, and it's all flat and there's fields everywhere, and then we suddenly put a 40-story skyscraper building in the middle of the countryside. It's not appropriate for what's happening around it. So that's, accents need to be thought of in the same way. We're bringing this out, but we're bringing it appropriate to what's going around it. And then finally, this phrase, expressive, idiomatic musical shaping, and detail. So looking at the details. What are the details on your music? The staccatos, the tenutos, any details that the composers put on the music must be included. Now, you may also get marks if you put in historical details that maybe are not written on the music. For instance, Baroque music, and the way Baroque music can be, articulation can be used to create dynamics effects, that would come here under detail as well. Now, performance. Again, these expressions under performance, I feel like they cross over. But I see assured. I think, does the student appear confident? Do they look like they're a professional on stage, or do they look timid, or they look uncomfortable? So I want to know that they, at least, it doesn't matter whether they actually know what they're doing, but they've got to look like they know what they're doing, and look like they are a professional. And yes, even though we're recording in a situation where there's potentially no audience, they still need to have that look of confidence. Are they fully committed? This expression, when I see it, I think that must mean, does the student's whole body seem to be part of the musical narrative? An example I can think of is Copeland's Cat and Mouse, and at the end of it, there's a funeral for this mouse that supposedly died. Now, if I was fully committed to that performance, then I get to the end and the mouse has died, and I don't want my body to look all happy. My body is sad. My body's part of this funeral. So I want my body to be committed to whatever my music is. If my music's happy, my body should be happy. If my music's sad, my body should be sad. And I don't mean by going over the top with body motion. But if I'm sitting there very, very, very tense and the music's doing all sorts of emotional things, I'm probably not fully committed. So that's how I read that statement. And then vivid communication of character and style. I think this does cross over with the others. But the way I explain this one to students is, if you close your eyes, or if the audience was to close their eyes, can they imagine this music performance as being a backdrop for a matching movie scene. Because movie music has to create the characters, create the tension, create the style. So imagine your performance has to do that. Does your performance make the music for a movie? Because if it doesn't, that's what you want to bring into it so that the character and style of the piece is actually projected to the audience. Now, communication, again, as I said, I think these link in together, but the statement on the syllabus is consistently well projected and involved, showing strong performance commitment and conviction. And so that comes back to being assured, that comes back to does my music paint the right story? So, and the second comment on the criteria was effective sequencing and pacing of chosen program, consistently good performance, awareness, and control. So thinking about the sequencing, consider the order. So for instance, slow, fast is a common one. If all your pieces are slow, then you're thinking, is that actually an effective sequence and pacing? Is that a concert that would, if that was a concert, would that excite me, or do I want more variety than that? So you want to think about, how do I order my pieces? Is my ending the best way I can end? And like normally I like to end with a fast piece, which is quite exciting, but it's not a be all and end all. But we do want to think about our order, not just play without thinking about the order. So whatever we do, the performance needs to feel balanced. Secondly, we need appropriate gaps between our pieces. And I see this on Facebook a lot, where people are complaining, oh, they criticize the gaps between the pieces, are too long, too short. But I think the idea is we have to let the mood of one piece finish and let that mood leave our body, because our body's part of the piece, and then reset and start the next one. So I sort of think about like where a movie fades out at the end, or maybe the music, the notes of the music are like floating through the air and they leave. And now I can breathe, and now I reset my body. What's my new mood for my next piece? What we don't want is, we don't want that to be too long. We don't want that to be too short. If it's too short, they finish the last note, bang, page turn, start the next piece. That hasn't given time for the first piece's mood to like evaporate. So, but then if it's too long, of course, then the audience is going to start moving around if they were there. So it's trying to get what would be the appropriate gap in time between these two pieces, so I can reset the mood without being overly long. So there's not a definitive answer. It would depend on each performance. How well can they portray that aspect? Now, the next criteria is interpretation. So consistently effective stylistic characterization, interpretive demands of the program well met. And the second comment in that criteria is consistently good awareness and control of textures and ensemble with effective blending and balancing. So, and again, this is still for distinction, but I think the stylistic characterization must be appropriate for the way the music is played. Now, I hesitate a little bit because I'm a real Baroque buff, and I like my music played really historically accurate, and that is one correct way for an effective stylistic characterization of the music. But many times Baroque music in modern days is not played in a way that would match the treatise, but it's accepted as being a Baroque way of playing it. Or sometimes people will go, well, we're playing a piano, so we'll do it slightly differently because we're using a piano, not a historic instrument. But what we want to make sure is the way we're playing it is consistent with how professionals play this piece. Is it the historical way? Is it one of the modern ways it's played? But we don't want to do our own thing that's completely inconsistent with the piece of music. I did once examine someone for an exam where they were playing Chopin, but with Baroque interpretation. And I had to take off so many marks. I was so upset about it because it was actually played really well. And I really liked what it sounded like, but it wasn't an effective stylistic characterization. It didn't match the performance. It would probably be great for TikTok or something, but for an exam, no, we want to make sure that our playing matches either the historical way or how that sort of music is performed generally. Now, the music, as I mentioned before, must feel interpreted. It shouldn't just be notes like playing a typewriter. There must be a sense of phrasing. There must, and it doesn't need to be the same as someone else. It doesn't need to be the same as Ling Ling or someone like that. But we want to hear what's the music saying. And it's quite acceptable that the way you make the music say something, because you've brought out these motives a little bit more, is slightly different to how someone else makes it sound. But we need to feel that interpretation aspect. And so, and then check your recordings. For, where does it say there? The control of textures and ensemble. Always check the recording, because to get effective blending and balancing is not the same with recording as it is in real life. You might be sitting in the room going, oh, that's perfect. But when you listen to the recording, it can be terribly out of balance. And maybe the piano, particularly cello, I find, that, and singers, actually cello and singers, the piano is so loud compared to the soloist and sometimes drowns them out. And if a recorder player plays with the piano, that's a common problem as well. So the where we position the microphone matters. You want to be closer to the performer, and sometimes just moving the position of the microphone is enough to balance the accompaniment and the instrument. In real life, obviously, you're actively correcting that on the spot, but the examiner can only mark what they hear. So if they can't hear the performer or can't hear the shaping, so all the shaping and all the interpretation stuff we talked about, that sometimes gets drowned out if the accompanist is just too loud. So make sure your microphone is positioned so that the instrument's performance can be heard and examined. If you're recording piano, generally, I think it's better to put the microphone on the right side. Yes, right side, because the higher strings are less dominating in the sound spectrum. So if you're on the right side, the microphone's picking up the high strings better. If you put on the low side, it can give the impression that the bass is played a lot louder than the melody. So, but you can test that in your own room, in your own space. Where does the sound echo off the walls? Maybe the recording is very dry, and so you need more pedal. Maybe the opposite. So listen back to your recording to make sure that what's on the recording is what you want the examiner to hear. And then if there's any interplay between the accompanist and the soloist, so maybe what I mean by that is maybe the soloist has a melody that then the accompanist takes off them and then plays, or maybe they're playing a counter melody with each other. You want to bring those sort of elements out, because that's your control of textures and ensemble. And so it's a great way to control texture when you're showing off those elements there. And also that's the soloist showing an awareness, consistently good awareness and control of textures. When you're playing piano, obviously your texture, you need to think about, well, where's my melody? If I've got lots of notes, where's my melody? And then where's my ideas that are being passed between the hands, or the ideas that maybe feel like they're talking to each other? Sometimes that's what it can feel like. Are they being brought out in a way that's effective and sounds balanced? So there's lots we can say about interpretation, and it does obviously cross over. Now, the last aspect on the criteria is the delivery. And to me, this crosses over so much with performance. So the distinction criteria tells us consistently assured and controlled, technical challenges of the program well met. And the second part of it is consistently effective instrument management, fully responsive to the performance situation. So there's two parts there, and I feel like that they're covered in other sections anyway. But how even are your notes and fingers? I think students particularly need to be taught to listen from one note to the next. Are they similar volume? Or for instance, if I'm playing a scale section, when I put my thumb under, is it louder than the others? Or if I'm using my bow, that note that has to be really long, am I pulling my bow too slow that the tonal quality is so much weaker than the notes around it? So we want to listen for evenness. And if we're practicing that, I actually suggest to students that they try and practice perfectly flat. Can you train your fingers or your instrument to play every note exactly the same volume? Because if you can, then you're in control. Then you can start shaping. But we don't want volume of notes to be uneven. We also don't want the rhythmic value of notes to be uneven. And all fingers are different lengths. And if students bend their fingers the wrong way, if I show you, if they bend their fingers wrong, that actually takes time. And I find that when students are doing that, that's when their fingers become uneven on the instrument, because their time is getting wasted by that. And obviously 3 and 4 can be hard to control evenly. So you might want to practice scales using the metronome to help get greater control with the rhythmic precision. And then you have to listen to get greater control of the volume precision. So, and then I've just said how evenly controlled is the tone from one note to the next. So we don't want a random thumping note that destroys the phrase. We want to control our phrasing. When we go back to our phrasing, we want a rise and a fall of a phrase. We don't want it to be interrupted by the fact that our fingers actually aren't able to play the tone controlled. And so they're randomly accentuating notes, and then that we lose our phrasing marks. Then effective instrument management, I feel like this is the partly moving around the instrument. So can you move around the instrument and not pause? So students often, when they have to jump, whether it's on the violin going down to the G string or having to leap somewhere on the piano, they don't always find where they're supposed to go. So that's the geography of the instrument. And that would be part of managing the instrument, but also thinking about the space you're in. When I am playing in this room, in this space, on this instrument, is my pedaling too much or too little? Students will often get practicing at home with their pedal, and they come into the teacher's space and the room's different, and so they're either over or under pedaling. That's part of what we're trying to teach them. Listen to what the pedal's doing. Okay, the music doesn't say to change the pedal here, but it's too heavy, it's too oversaturated. So let's do a quick change. Let's release some of that wetness in the music and in the tonal quality to match whatever space we're performing in. A really echoey space is going to need a lot less pedal. A space with lots of carpet, that's going to absorb sound, so you're going to get away with a lot heavier pedaling, and actually you're probably going to want it depending on the piece. And then how well do you cover up your mistakes or adjust for any situation that can occur in an exam room? We're going to make mistakes. When I went to university, I remember one of the lecturers saying 60% of what a performer does is mistakes. The trick is how it's covered up. There is actually an incident in the movie Rain Man. Dustin Hoffman, I think, is the actor's name. I'm not very good at actors' names. But he actually farted in the scene. And it was covered up because Tom Cruise reacted in a way without breaking character. No one broke character, and actually it was so good that it stayed in the movie, but it was a mistake. And you wouldn't know that when you watch the movie because it looks so intentional, like it's supposed to be there. But that's the trick. We're playing, we don't want to lose our rhythm. We don't want to stop. We don't want to make anything on our face. We want to cover that up. And so that would be an effective instrument management. That would be responding to the performance situation. Other things can happen. In the Les Mis anniversary edition, there was a balloon that popped, and the singer sort of, like, you could see it startled her. She was only a young girl. It was the young Cosette, but she startles, but she keeps going. She doesn't break character. So how well we adjust actually will affect our mark. One of my exams I did, the harpsichordist who was accompanying me, she mucked up the rhythm, but I have a choice. I either insist that I play the right rhythm or I adjust for her mistake. And so that's here, if you're adjusting for your accompanist making a mistake, that's here where, I was responsive to the performance situation. So I would suggest that's where you're going to get your marks there. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm a bit afraid of something going wrong if I press stop share. So that's the end of the presentation. So hopefully that's been helpful for for those who are in the room, and for anyone who's watching later or on the live stream, that you can reflect on what you're doing, use recorded exams to be able to teach reflection, and to be able to give a student a no fail option, because you're going to make sure that the student doesn't fail by making sure the recording meets the criteria. So I didn't do all the criteria, I've only done the distinction. So you can, obviously that's what we want to aim for, is distinction, but you can go through the criteria and say, well, what would give me other marks? But we want to tell our students to aim for that set of criteria. So I'll stop the live stream now, and hopefully it's all worked and everything is good. And then if you've got any questions, I will stay online for a bit to answer them. And of course, you can ask in the Facebook group as well.